Welcome back, guys, to my YouTube channel. Let's continue from what we stopped last time in the previous video. So basically, in this video, we'll be writing our HTML form. In AngularJS, before we can write HTML form, we have to make sure we have right kind of package being imported. So let's go into this the shared module right here. And then we have to make sure this forms module is imported. And this forms module, as you can see, exists in this form package here. Angular.form, that's where it resides, and we have to make sure this form module is imported into our application. And just to make sure, this import property of our ng module decorator has that property, form module. So that means at this point we are basically ready to use the form module, okay, in our application. Okay, let's go into our component HTML, our template here, and this is where we're going to write our HTML form here. Okay, let's start coding. This one is nothing, so we just have plain HTML form with not really angularized form yet. So we'll slowly introduce some terminology as we encounter, and I'll explain to you how they really work. Okay, very first thing we can do something called event binding. This is how we do event binding to submit. We can do ng submit, and then to it we're going to wire up. Let's say we'll have on submit a function here into our class. So, and after that we can introduce a concept called template reference variable. In Angular, the template reference variable always starts with a pound sign, and the name is also name depends upon your context. In our case, we are developing this developer job, so I'm going to say developer job form. Since it's a form, I'm going to say developer job form, and then I'm going to wire this developer job form with the directive called ng form. I'm associating this variable developer job form, this template reference variable, with our ng form directive of Angular. And then we also introduce this directive here, non-validated. This basically is saying, a lot of HTML5 control, they provide default validation. We're saying don't provide that validation. That's what this basically a directive means. So at this point, our form is angularized form. So here inside the form, we can start writing our control. Okay, let's write some div here. Give it a class form group. These are just the bootstrap, CSS classes. They are not really needed, but it kind of provides nice texture to it. And then let's have a label here, and this label is for job title. Even before that, I don't know, because when we write the form, the form should be driven by our model. So what I have done now, in our model, we already have industry type that we did in our last video tutorial. So here I introduced a new file here called developer job. This one basically corresponds to our model, our server-side model here. So we have this class called developer job, and the constructor of that class basically contains all the properties here. Job title, company name. So they basically mimic what we have in our server-side. And then the only important property here is that, constructor parameter is like company address. This company address is of data type, complex data type, company address object, which is defined in the top right here. A company address, so this constructor basically contains ID, address, all those information, okay? All those basic parameter representing an address. Okay, that is that. So, let me close this file. I don't need this right away. We have our model defined. Let's go in here, and then let's introduce Very first thing we're going to do, we're going to import this guy here. We're going to import this file called developer job. And from here, we can import our company address, our developer job, and company address. Okay. Oh, I think this one is already listed here. Okay. All right, so we already have that one defined here. Developer job, and company address. We imported that module in our system already. So based on that, let's go ahead and create a variable here. I'm going to call this property this as a developer job of type developer job. And it kind of makes sense if we provide default values to this object. To do that, let's write a little method. Let's say this initialize developer job. Of course, this method doesn't really exist yet. We need to create this one. Let's maybe it can create declaration. Okay, no, it cannot. Let's create a private method here. And as you might guess, this method is going to be pretty simple, this private method. So basically, it's going to return the new instance of our developer job object with some default parameter like empty string, whatever, or if it's a numeric type, then the cool thing about TypeScript, it right away, because our method is not returning anything, it right away, hey, it doesn't, because by default return undefined, so we are assigning undefined to that, so it's a problem. So we're going to say, all right, go ahead and return new developer job. Remember, this is a constructor. This object contains huge amount of parameter into a constructor, so we need to supply those parameter. So the first parameter is company, the job title. I want to put this into the next line so it's easier to code. And then the second, the code editor provides some hint here. The next parameter is company name of type string. We can provide empty string for this one too. The third parameter is the company address, which is of type company address. So to do that, we need to create a new company address. And this one also, remember, this one also is an object, a complex object. So we need to, let's say for IDM, provide default value 0, address 1 as empty, address 2 empty string as city, state, zip code, and the country name. Okay, so next parameter is a salary range, which is a string. I'm going to set it that. Remote option, which is Boolean. Let's say by default, I'm going to set it to false. No remote option available. And then equity sharing, maybe let's say false for this one too. By default, set it to false. Next parameter is job type of type number. I'm going to give this value 0 to it. Then after that, experience level, also numeric. And then job type ID, numeric, experience label is a string. And then industry ID is a numeric, just set it to 0. And then company size is a number, so we give it value 0. Company type ID is also a number. And finally, the job description, which is string. So this constructor should be happy now. Okay, but it seems like it's not really happy. Why? Okay, so we create, I don't know, somewhere we mess it up. Let me make sure. Okay, that is first salary range. Okay, remote option. This is false, boolean. Then equity sharing also false. Then job type ID is number. Let's give it 1. And experience label string. Industry ID a number. Company size is also a number. Company size. Company type is also a number. And finally job description. Okay, I don't know, maybe I have perhaps incorrect data type or whatever, that's why I got error. Okay, so now we have basically a simple method here. So now we have the fully saturated object here. Just to see whether, okay, let's go back into our HTML now. We have our method. We introduced this method here called onSubmit. Let's go ahead and implement that method inside our class called addJobComponent, and this is our constructor here. Maybe after this. Maybe just for now, I'm gonna say just gonna write down console.log this.devjob here. Okay, now we can go back into writing our HTML. Before writing our HTML, text control, all those drop-down lists and all those kind of control, let's go ahead and introduce. We need a button to submit, right? Let's go ahead and a submit button here. Let's give it some CSS class button as a primary button here. Add developer job, something like that. And then I also would like to have a reset button, so basically reset the whole thing. There's a button, class button as a link button, and just do a reset. Okay, so we have a job button and to add the job, and we have a reset button. And just to make sure it calls it wired up, it calls our method. I have a console here there, so basically if I do this, right now it just basically prints out it logs the job information. Of course we don't have anything, so by default all these properties are set to 0. Set to empty string, whatever data type they were. Okay, let's write down our first control here inside this form control. Let's write a label. This label for our job title. So just to make sure, this job title is very first property of our domain object called developer job. That's what we're trying to wire up with. Here's the label. This is job title. And we'll have a text box here, simple text box. of type text. Let's make it, this can be a form control. As you might get, as from your HTML coding, you know, like the ID of this one, which should be a job title. Okay, this is our very simple text box here. Okay, we have a text box and sub button. But of course, this text box doesn't do anything. It cannot talk to cannot talk to our model, or cannot do any communication yet. So, but however, let's see. This text box here, we want to make sure this is a required text box. We will have a validation also, because we will have all the required validation here. Okay, so this required means this user must fill in, you know, before doing anything else. The most important thing when you're developing, it always tied up with the name property of the input of the control. So we need to set the name. I'm going to set the name as same as this job title, which is basically a property of my object developer job. Here's a job title, and right now we have not introduced the binding yet. In Angular, we have like two ways of binding. I mean, like there are two different ways of binding: one-way binding or two-way binding. The one-way binding is basically could be from your model to, you know, view, or could be from view to model. But however, we could have two-way binding, so it could be from view to model and model to view, you know, simultaneously. So in most of the, so basically from my experience, like if you are creating those objects, you don't really have to have a two-way binding. But if you are doing edit, it's a two-way binding is useful. So anyway, we can use two-way binding here. So to do two-way binding, this is how it really works. The syntax is kind of weird. You have to kind of memorize it, and you're going to introduce the ng model directive provided by Angular, and you're going to tie that with. So in this case, I'm going to say this is our div job. It has a property called job title. That's where I'm going to tie it up with. This is going to be my model. And then next thing, we just like we introduce the template-driven variable for the form. We're going to introduce a template-driven variable for the control also. In this case, for the job type control. So to do that, I'm going to say job title. I'm going to associate that with the ng model directive. So ideally, anything that the form contains, we can easily access by using job title dot value. So anything that has reference to that text box, we can refer to. We can get value from it. We can set the value to it. Okay, this is what this template reference variable is tied up with this input type, this in particular input box. Okay, that is all we have to do. So let's see if it is. We don't have any error yet. And if I type something here, and then we have this console.log, we should have that job type value set. So if I hit that, as you can see, this our value that we typed is set into our object called developer job, with the first property set to this value. Okay, so since we also do, like I said before, this text box is going to be a required field. To make it required, we need to introduce some other. So let's write some code here. This is our input field right here. Okay. We're going to have a div here. Inside the div, we're going to say text like a job title is required. This is the message we would like to display to user if the user did not fill in that form, right? So right now, of course, we don't have anything to, that's why it shows down here. But let's make it better. Like we can introduce some bootstrap classes to the validation, like alert and alert danger classes. So it kind of like shows in the red. If you haven't done this, bootstrap, this is not okay. So it's better, looking better, right? So user kind of providing hint to it. But however, we just want to. So okay, this is okay. So of course, right now it doesn't. Ideally, we'd like to have this button disabled also. At the same time, we don't want to display this title right away. We would like to display if the form is invalid, meaning user do not enter any data in it. Okay. So to do that, into our div class, we're gonna introduce another binding called div. We're gonna say hidden, and we're gonna set that to this. So once we have like parameterized template variable. So what we can do now is we can say job title, and then we can say whether it's valid or not. This valid is introduced by the framework. Okay, this property is added to this template variable by the framework. So you can use that property, see whether that form is valid or not. At the same time, we can say or either that is the case or this job title is pristine, means it hasn't been touched. Let's save this one. So as you can see right now, the validation message is not displayed right away. But and the next thing we want to do right now is also we don't want that button to be busy. Right now, button is by default is enabled. We want to have this disabled until the user enters all the required fields. So how can we do that? So in our button here, okay, in our TypeScript code, in our HTML code here, in our button, we can use that disable attribute as disable. We're going to set the value of that disable based on whether that form is valid or not. Remember, we introduced that form label, this variable here, this template reference variable, and then the framework automatically provides properties for that object, such as form and valid property, just like for the other controls. So we're going to set this one to disable. However, if it is not valid, this means it's valid, we have to use a negation operator here to make it negative. So we're going to set by default it to be disabled. Okay, at this point our button is disabled, but however, if we start add some data here, it is enabled. But however, this, for some reason, our validation message is not working. That's the bug. We'll have to fix it. Okay. So now, if this one, well, actually, I'm missing the header. Let's give the label job title. That's why it was kind of like looking weird. So okay, now it has a job title, and then now just like for we do binding for the job title property of our developer job object, we can go ahead and start binding to other string data type. This would be very similar. So let's go ahead and do the binding for the company name. As you might have guessed, it's going to be structure going to be exactly the same. We'll change it a little bit. Okay, so this is where, so basically I need this bunch of code here, and I'm going to write down this. Instead of job title, our this is going to be a company name. That's the one. That's the property we're trying to wire up, trying to bind. It's a company name. Just give a label as company name. And this name property is very important. You have to make sure it is exactly the same. That's how the binding really works. So it is an NC model. Instead of this job property, we can have this company name. And let's associate that template reference variable as company name. And it's also going to be required field. And then instead of this job title, we'll have this company name. This is the company name, and let's just change the text of this one to company name is required. Company name is required. Okay. Okay, we don't have any error in our console, which is always a good thing, like that's the drawback of writing, JavaScript based framework. You have to make sure your console is clear. So okay, so right now by default this guy is disabled here. We can start filling this in, and of course we need to fix this bug. Why it is displaying, and then if I do add developer job here, I'll have company name and the job title. All those properties are set, which is really good. So it's coming along. So we can use exactly the same kind of structure for all our string type, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, this is right. The company address is a little different because it has a nested object. Let's see how to do that one. Let's do that just for the address 1 or something like that. This is address 1. I'm going to name it as a address 1. And the ID and those is still going to be input parameter. And then, so however, this is going to be a div job, and name of our property based on this is a company address. Oops. So this is how we reference into our NZ model. This is our object. And then instead of saying company name, we have to change it to address 1. And generally, address 1 is always required field. It says require. Here's an NZ model. And instead of this, we can say address 1. Address 1 is required field. Okay, if there is no typo, hopefully, okay, they're working okay. You see, functionality-wise, when you look into developer tools and make sure, oh, Why it is not explained? Okay, here is a company address. Company address as address 1 is set to a value CCC. Okay, that is so far is so good. So let's kind of deviate, because we know how to do a text binding, which is very straightforward. Um, the next thing we're going to talk about how to do a binding of our drop-down list. In terms of drop-down list, we need to have a couple of things. We need to, if you guys have been following along, we need to bind our lookup table information, such as we need to be able to bind the industry, we need to be able to bind all the company types and the job types that user are trying to fill in. Those are, of course, these all data comes from the backend database. But sometimes, like in this example, we need some static data. When I say static data, for example, all the state of the United States, that is static data, or all the countries of the world, or certain those kind of things. Those kind of things we can store that data as some sort of resources. So basically, that's what I have done. I have this file into the resources folder here. I have a little TypeScript file called US states. I just define the interface, has the two properties, name and a code, and this is how I define the US states, which is basically an array of interface US state, and basically initialize those with the name as a name of the state, in this case Alabama, and the code is AL. That's AL portion, or abbreviated portion of that state. That's what we're going to store into the backend database. Okay, let's look into one example how to do binding of such thing of this state. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this way, because we look at because I don't have to. By watching this video, you should be able to do that for the text boxes. Now let's do for the drop-down list. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I don't need this one. I'm going to close that. Very first thing I have to do, I need to import that resources here. Model import. Here's my resources folder, and in that resources folder I have my model called US states. That's what we need. And from this I want to import US state, my interface, and my actual data US states, like that. Oh, this comma here. Okay, so it's kind of really neat, because we don't have to. We don't have to have all this clutter code into one file by importing. We have that information available. And here now I can introduce a variable called. Let's introduce variable public US states. This US state is going to be US state, array of those, and we can just give the value right away from the US states, like that. So basically we are saying, okay, we'll have this public properties called US state of type US state of an array of those, and basically give the value US state. We have this guy is now this object property here is fully saturated. Now we should be able to bind this one. Let's go ahead into our HTML. And then let's going to be a from group, and then we're going to introduce I think this will be the first one. We're going to introduce a built-in directive called ngIf. So basically, into ngIf we can say US state, if that object US state is defined, and then US states dot. Remember, this is just the array property, so we can do something like that. So idea is like anything inside this D would be visible if those object is saturated. Those object already contains all the data, which is really neat. But we can introduce even better. We can introduce a new variable into our class and say basically whether its state exists. Then instead of writing this, but this one is still okay. So right now we're going to write our select here, our drop-down list, and give it a class. It's going to be a form control just like any other text boxes here. And we have our, let's introduce this binding concept too. So the way it's going to work is, of course, it is tied to the address, so we'll have a company address dot state, okay, and then we're going to set the name as a state and just give an ID also as a state, and then before that let's have a label here for state, and just label a state. And we're going to introduce our template reference variable as a state and set it to ng model, just like a text box control, no difference. And this property, this control is also required, so we're going to set the required one. Okay, so in here the option, we're going to introduce another. If the people who are new to Angular, we're going to introduce a new Angular directive. So this can be ng4. This if we have some sort of iterable object like an array or some kind of object or anything that we can do for each. This is the construct we can use, and we're going to use this HTML ECMAScript 6 late as basically as if it's a bar, but it's more better in terms of its scope. Let's call it US state. Just basically declaring a variable called US state in our data exists in US state into our class. So basically we are iterating through this. In here now we can do a binding here, one-way binding called interpolation. So as you guess right here, if we look into our model called US state, we have a property called name and code. So name refers to the whole name of the state, and code refers to two-letter code of the state A. So here into it, we're going to say dot name, and then we also need to set the value do interpolation just like name state dot code. Okay, and let me grab some of the code for the validation from here and just oh, it's already here, okay. But of course it's going to say the state. I want to this data to come after the name of address 1. Of course, we'll be filling that up, address 2, city, state, zip code, all of those, and after that comes, of course, the state right here, just for now. And then let's copy this piece of code also. After that, select is also required field. So instead of that, we got here's our state. State is required. I don't know if there is no error. Binding should be working fine, but looks like since we wrote a bunch of code, we definitely have issue going on. Because let me see why. Yeah, we have tons of error. We introduced tons of error. We gotta fix it. Why it is. Okay, we have something wrong in our binding. Option ng4 let US state in. Let me make sure I have that property the same name. Okay, we have US states is there. Okay, so far this is what we have. So basically we have a div here with the form group, and we have our drop-down list, and we have an ng model set to the state property of our company address, and then we give this template reference variable to ng model, and this is how we do the for iteration binding here, ng4 directive here, and we basically iterating over our array object called US state. And then the value of that one would be the code, as we saw earlier, and then this can be the name. And if we save everything and everything is good, we should be able to see our state. As you can see right here, state, all the state are bound correctly. Okay, so this is where I'm going to pause this video. And so starting from next, we will have all our next thing we're going to do, we should be able to bind our data that's coming up from the backend database using ASAC services. That's what we're going to do, and we'll have all our form code ready. And after that, we should be able to submit, which we'll be doing in our next video tutorial. Thank you, guys. I'll continue. I'll record next video soon. Thank you so much for watching.